We are back, remembering Dynasty, bums, and a whole hell of a lot more with Peter Golenbock. I'm Ralph Tycho, and blessed today to have my friend from Tampa.
No.
I tried to say it from St. Petersburg. I tried to say it from St. Petersburg, and didn't. But nice to have you.
You're like the ESPN announcers. You're like the ESPN announcers. They come and put the Tampa Bay Rays games, which take place in the Trop in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they talk about we're here in Tampa. It's like going to watch the Minnesota Twins. It would be like if they were in the ballpark and they would say, we're here in St. Paul.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what has the most spirituality of any ballpark in St. Petersburg was the Jack Lang, Casey Stengel.
Al Lang. Jack Lang. Al Lang.
Al Lang, I think, was a writer, or Jack Lang was a writer, but Al Lang Field, that is magical. And
Al Lang Field is now a soccer field.
Really? Oh,
yep.
Okay.
It's now a soccer field. The Tampa Bay Rowdies are now the people who play at Al Lang Stadium, believe it or not.
In St. Petersburg. So is this confusion not brought on by the city fathers or why don't they call them the St. Petersburg Rowdies, just out of curiosity?
Well, Tampa Bay. I mean, everything's Tampa Bay because they want to attract fans from both Tampa and St. Petersburg. That's why they call them the Minneapolis Twins and not the they call them the Minnesota Twins and not the Minneapolis Twins for the same reason.
That's right.
Or the Florida Marlins. They're called the Florida Marlins because they want to attract people from places other than just Miami.
Right, and that
believe it or not, there are a couple
conscious change. Originally, they were the Miami Marlins. So
when they were in the minor leagues, when they were minor.
No, when they were first formed, they were the Miami Marlins.
Were they?
Yep.
It's funny. I don't remember them that way. Okay.
But you do remember the book you wrote on the Red Sox, what we're going to talk about. I know that because that was
Red Sox Nation. Red Sox Nation. It has been updated so that you can read about the last 3 World Championships that the Red Sox managed to win.
Wow. Very, very good, because most of the books on the Red Sox, since they won, have been fans' schmaltz. That's what...
Well, you know why they're fans... Right, they're fan schmaltz for a reason. They're fan schmaltz because what has happened in the last 10 years is that it's become almost impossible to reach ball players. It used to be when I first started out, if you wanted to reach a ball player, I had a book that had the addresses of every ball player playing in the major leagues. Actually, the book still exists.
Yeah, I know it does. And that's something that's on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a book I'm going to invest in for obvious reasons. A great book, like a reverse directory of everybody, and you just call them up, and it was,
well, there's a story behind it.
Phone numbers?
There's no phone numbers, just addresses.
But it was easy to get phone numbers in those days too. If you had the address
the people were listed. The players were listed. If you had their address, you called up on and dialed 411?
Right.
Like that.
Yeah.
611, whatever it was, and the operator would come on and say, "What telephone number do you want?"
Right. Yeah. Now it's impossible to get a live operator. You can be dying on the street and you couldn't get a live operator in any way, shape, or form. But I'll tell you how it was.
I was going to say people now have cell phones.
Yes, which you now have one, did you say?
No.
Okay. Well, it is on some level, and I'm saying technology can be incredibly consuming of a person. It could interfere with personal interactions. But, boy, it's nice to have something that you could instantaneously Google something. You could be out and about, and you Google something, you get an answer. It is
well, all those people who have Siri. The Siri is amazing. Siri, what's the weather today?
Yeah, exactly.
Siri, or Siri, are the Rays going to beat the Giants today?
Yeah, or you can just say into it, my little regular old smartphone, nothing extravagant. You could just go Mets score, and it'll come back in a second. The Mets are beating the Braves in your dreams.
Well, I saw an interview. I saw an interview on TV with the fella who invented Siri, and
really?
A fairly young guy, and he sold Siri to Apple, and now he's working on developing what is it called? Artificial intelligence, to the point where it's going to be amazing. I mean, you're not going to, in life, have to know anything. Whatever you want to know, you just ask the artificial intelligence, and they'll pretty much tell you. You want to go on a trip? I'd like to go to, Bali. I'd like to stay in a mid-priced restaurant, a mid-priced hotel. I'd like to eat at a fancy restaurant. And then they'll tell you exactly where to go.
Incredible.
Pretty amazing. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's what a world we live in.
And in 10 years, it'll be more. In 10 years, it'll be so much more than it is even right now.
Oh, everything. Knowledge, because for every bit of knowledge, it grows exponentially.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. The trick is to just hang in there until they can start replacing body part. Really, I mean, we're exactly the same age, although you're 3 or 4 months older than I am, 1946. Mm-hmm. We got a chance, if we could stay healthy in our minds and our bodies relatively, to take care of it, to take advantage of some of this technology 10 years from now.
Yes.
So
we can live forever. Ralph, we can live forever.
I don't know if that's a threat or a promise. I can't. It depends on the time of day and my and whatever. But
all depends on Siri. It's up to Siri.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little Red Sox. I want to know from you how it came about that you did the book. Was it a natural extension of you go from one franchise to another? Dynasty was an incredible success. I mean, that and Bums, those two books were so incredibly comprehensive. Having read the Red Sox one, I'm sure it's exactly the same, given your ethic and your way of doing things. How did you get the inroad to go to the Red Sox, and or did you just go around the Red Sox? Some books are written without the consent of the team or even the players you're writing about. How did you?
Well, the only baseball team that really cooperated with me, believe it or not, were the Mike Burke New York Yankees. When I called Marty Appel and told him I had a contract to write a book on the Yankees, he said, "Come on, come do your research at Yankee Stadium." And this was a year before George showed up and fired them all. But during the Mike Burke era, these were wonderful people, and they were not paranoid, and they were happy to have people come and write history of their team. And they helped me in any way they possibly could with the Yankee book. They gave me addresses,
the Dodgers
telephone
didn't
numbers.
react in kind?
The Dodgers were in Los Angeles. This was a Brooklyn Dodgers that I was writing.
Yeah, that you were writing about. But they must have archives in Los Angeles about Dodger information. I mean, it's really one big franchise. You did that on your own.
No, I did that. I did all the rest of them on my own. I've done books. I've done team histories after Dynasty and Bums of the Chicago Cubs, which was Wrigleyville.
Cardinals?
The Cardinals, which is the Spirit of St. Louis. I stole the title from Lindbergh.
Right, we talked about that.
He didn't mind.
Nazi
I did Amazing, which was about the Mets, and Red Sox Nation, which was originally called Fenway. The first edition, which I think I did somewhere around 1985, was called Fenway. The idea of calling it Red Sox Nation was so that the publisher would trick people into thinking that the people who bought Fenway might also buy Red Sox Nation, which I doubt very much happened. But it did very well because every time you update a book like this, you get the more younger, more recent people, and the latest Red Sox Nation goes all the way up through I think 2013, where they won the third World Series in the last few years, which was really quite something. But the history of the Red Sox, or how I did it, again, Jack Smalling. I want to tell you about Jack Smalling. Jack Smalling has this book, which you can buy, I guess, on Amazon more than anything else, which is the addresses of all the living ball players. And the reason Major League Baseball allowed Smalling to do that was that very often when these players retired, the Major League Baseball didn't know where to send their pensions. In other words, the players had retired and, say, moved, gone somewhere else, and Major League Baseball didn't know where to send their checks. So they made a deal with Smalling. You keep doing what you're doing, which is, tracking down the Major League ball players and finding out where they live, and we'll use your material to send them their pensions.
And I'll tell you who else used that material were memorabilia collectors.
Oh, that was the point of it. That was the point of it, to send a little card.
Yeah, for an autograph or
a Hall of Fame ball player, please sign this and send it back to me. And I used to do that a lot. I mean, I had, a lot of Hall of Famers used to do that. Once the hobby became bathed in money somewhere around the mid-'80s, a lot of these ball players stopped doing it because they would go to card shows and be paid, say, $25,000 for the weekend to sign their name. But before that happened, you could pretty much write anybody, and it was terrific. So I had Smalling's books, which enabled me to find a lot of the Red Sox. Also, the Red Sox at the time had a fantasy camp. And I called the fellow who ran the fantasy camp and told him when I was
Brian Doyle. Was it Brian Doyle?
It was not a ball player. It was not a ball player.
Oh, okay.
This fellow was not a ball player. And he said, by all means, come for the week if you'd like and interview anybody you want. And it was just fabulous. I mean, Bobby Doerr was there. Johnny Pesky was there. Had just a wonderful afternoon. One day, Ted Williams showed up, and it was just fantastic. We're standing in line to get the fried chicken in the the dinner line for the guests, and I'm standing there with Ted, and there's a woman standing in front of me, and the woman turns to Ted and says, my father's 90 years old. He's in the hospital. It would be the greatest thing if you would come into my hotel room and give him a call and just say hello. And so Ted looks at her, nice-looking woman. Ted looks at her and says, I'll do that if you'll sleep with me. And so I'm standing there, and the woman's jaw drops. Absolutely, the woman's jaw drops. And she looks at me, and she says, is he serious?
And you really didn't know if he was or not.
No, I knew.
He was serious.
I said, absolutely serious. And at any rate, that was the end of that conversation.
Did she walk off in a huff?
No, she was in the line. She was in the line waiting for her fried chicken. but it was, it gave me the opportunity to interview, 10 or 11 players who were there. Interestingly enough, the one player, and I've been friends with him since, Rico Petrocelli, was one of the players.
I love that name. Great.
And one of the things that I discovered about the Red Sox was that the Red Sox not only were racists, that they were the last team to sign a black player, and when they signed a black player, they signed a fellow who was sort of a bench sitter, Pumpsie Green.
Pumpsie Green.
Pumpsie Green. But this was in 1959, which is 12 years after Jackie Robinson came into the baseball. Because Yawkey lived on a plantation in South Carolina and probably had slaves. But the idea was that they were an incredibly racist team. And interestingly enough, talking to Frank Malzone and a couple of the other players on the Red Sox who were Italian, they also were terribly racist, if you want to call it that, against the Italians as well. Interesting.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's in Red Sox Nation if you want to see the details of it. But so I went to sit down with Petrocelli the way I often do, and the smart thing to do when you're interviewing somebody is not asking controversial questions with the first question. And I made a terrible mistake. I did a really stupid thing. Because when he was in the minors, one of his managers, one of those old Irish sons of a bitches who hated the Italians, treated Petrocelli really terribly. It's amazing Petrocelli made it even to the Red Sox. And so I asked him about that. And Rico, who's a really decent guy, was riled by it. And he walked away. He says, I'm not answering questions like that. And he walked away. I mean, probably in all the years I've been doing this, I've probably had, 5 players walk away, including Rico. Joe Black walked away. Joe Black, when I was doing my Bums book, had me come all the way from New Jersey to Norfolk, Virginia to interview him. And when he saw I was white, he said, sorry, not going to do the interview. He was another one. And DiMaggio, of course, I chased him all the way to San Francisco, and he ducked out the back door because, of course, he was always afraid that somebody was going to ask him about Marilyn Monroe. But otherwise, everybody else who was at that fantasy camp was just marvelous, just fabulous. I made friends with.
Did you ever get it together with Rico? You did get it together with Rico.
I was on his radio show several times. He had a radio show in Boston. I did his show several times up there with him, and I never brought it up to him as to what he did, and I'm sure he had no memory that I was the one that he did it to.
Right.
It's just these things happen. You interview 20 guys, and if you can get 19 of them, you're doing quite okay.
Absolutely. And that's what that fantasy. That's where it all got started for the book.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of them. I got LaHood was wonderful. Let's see. I went to see Ken Brett in California. Like I said, Bill Lee was really fabulous. Dennis Bennett was another one who was at that fantasy camp, and he was a really interesting guy.
From Wairika, California, Dennis Bennett.
Yeah, and he was living in Oregon or Washington or someplace like that. I interviewed Pumpsie Green. When I found Pumpsie Green, he was actually at Berkeley High School. He was a janitor.
Right, he was a custodian and a kind of a part-time coach, mentor to kids.
Wonderful guy. One of my favorites was Gene Conley. I went to see Gene. And he was
Celtic
marvelous.
And Red Sox.
And Red
there
Sox.
There was a story with Pumpsie Green when Gene Conley.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly
Gene
right.
Conley they're off to Israel.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of lore in that organization, and a lot of
let's tell the story. What happened?
Okay.
Quite frankly, Gene Conley was having. Gene Conley, in the winter, played with the Celtics, and in the summer, played with the Red Sox. And they reached the point in, let's see, what year was that? 59, 60, something like that.
Right around there.
He was
had
having
to be 59 plus because it was Pumpsie that he was taking with him.
He was having a nervous breakdown, and the bus was heading for Newark to go to Newark Airport, and it was stuck in traffic. And Gene decided that he wanted to go to Jerusalem. It was a sort of strange thing.
Right.
So he went to the airport with the idea that he was going to go to Jerusalem. The problem was that he didn't have his passport. And he wanted to take Pumpsie with him. And it's
They may have stopped for a beer. They may have stopped for a beer or two along the way.
I went back to Toots Shorts, and I told everyone, "Hey, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to Bethlehem. I'm going to the Promised Land. I'm going to get everything straightened out between me and my Savior." And they looked at me like I had three eyes. I started flashing my ticket around. "See, I'm going." A few guys said, "Conley, forget it. Get a good night's sleep. Go back to Washington." I said, "No, I'm going to go." I left there and I went to a place called Al Shack's. Stayed there, talked ball a lot. I let the word out where I was going, and I had them call me a cab. I got a cab and I went to LaGuardia Airport. When I got there were newspapermen and photographers. They figured they really got a story. But when I got there, the guy at the counter said, "Sorry, fella, but we can't let you go without a passport." I was so disappointed. You just wouldn't believe it. I thought, what the heck. Otherwise, I would have been gone. Why Jerusalem? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it was because I was kind of at the end of my career. Maybe I was worried about what was going to happen to Gene Conley and his family. I'd had chronic arm trouble for 5 or 6 years, so I didn't know how long I had left. And the next year, I was out of ball. I hadn't saved my money. Even if I hadn't had a beer concession, even if I hadn't had a beer occasionally, there wasn't all that kind of money in those days. So I was concerned about my family and the whole ball of wax because I was very much of a family man. But I did like to have a little tea once in a while. It went on like that. I mean, it's the joy. The joy of being in my profession is meeting people like Gene Conley. I mean, just so fabulous. And Bobby Dorr was so wonderful. Tony Lupian had been the baseball coach at Dartmouth College, and I was the sports editor there. So I've been a friend of his for 4 years. So when it came time to do this book, I had known that he had played with the Red Sox, and from like 49 to 52, and he was a close friend of Ted Williams and all these guys. And so I called Tony Lupian.
I never heard the name.
L-E-I-E-N. Yeah, Tony Lupian.
Okay.
And he told me some wonderful, wonderful stories. I mean, sometimes it's the guys you've never ever heard of who tell you the very best stories. And then of course, to talk to Dorr about Ted Williams was so wonderful. And you do research. I mean, you find out, why Ted Williams, for instance, had such a terrible time with the reporters. And it wasn't entirely Ted's fault. It was not entirely Ted's fault.
It was a salary. Was it a salary dispute that the papers?
Oh no, nothing like that. It's just.
I know DiMaggio had that going.
No, when Ted first came up, these reporters were a very tough bunch, and sometimes they got drunk, and Ted was not that way at all, and Ted just didn't have respect for these guys, and he'd stiff them. And for years, they would write terrible, terrible things about him. Just awful. Really terrible things. And I got to talk to Dom DiMaggio for a couple hours. And Dom was wonderful. I mean, the difference between Dom DiMaggio and Joe DiMaggio was like night and day. I mean, Dom DiMaggio had a wonderful family. He was a rock of the community. He had a lot of business sense. He had a fabulous business in Boston. It's just, so interesting how different some of these people are.
Yet both of them were so revered by their teammates, both DiMaggio and Williams.
Yeah.
I guess personalities. I guess some superstars reach that stage, Barry Bonds type, where it really doesn't matter how they are. It's the aura of their performance takes over. I don't know.
So Barry certainly was punished. If you want to talk about Barry, your boy from San Francisco and Pirates. But Barry was punished because Barry was just such an incredible prick. Barry had no respect really for anybody. He treated the press awfully. He treated his fans awfully. And yet, he was the best hitter that ever came into the game. I mean, Barry Bonds was better than Ruth. I mean, Ruth was a better player because Ruth was a great pitcher. Ruth won like 92 games before he became a hitter. But they would walk Barry with the bases loaded. That's a whole other subject having nothing to do with the Red Sox.
They would Ruth as well, though. They would walk Ruth with the bases loaded at times.
Yep. Yeah, well, those are the two great ones, and you can argue it any way you want, but Barry's up there with them. And Ted Williams, of course.
And so DiMaggio struck out fewer times than he had home runs.
That's right.
Stuff like that.
True.
These guys were in a class, and I think they almost get a free ride personality-wise. Ted had a lot of emotional problems. He
did. Well, Ted was funny. I mean, Ted was the sort of guy. I mean, Ted grew up poor. He grew up poor. He had a sort of a poor man's view of the world. And there could be 1,000 people cheering him and 2 people booing him, and he would hear the 2 boos. And that was Ted's problem. Because Ted one time, gave the fans the finger.
Right.
Ted would never tip his cap after hitting a home run.
Never did.
He only became lovable after he retired. Because it was funny. He was like Mickey. Neither of them really appreciated the adoration that came from the fans until after they retired. Mickey was the sort of guy who said to himself, I'm no big deal. Why's anybody even like me? It was funny that way. And Ted...
You and I both this week watched on YouTube, on Facebook, a YouTube dealie on Mantle's retirement, and you were at that game. It was engrossing. Not only did everybody come back, everybody, DiMaggio, Yawkey, Whitey, Heinrich, everybody and their dog was back, but people stood up, and you were one of them, it had to be 15 minutes of applause. It was just
15 minutes as he rode around in a cart and waved. It was.
It was unbelievable. Even before they got to that, they couldn't let him make a speech. He just stood there, and I'll bet that's when he realized that, the fans did love me so much, and nothing will replace what this has been, and that's probably fueled his demons. He's had, in your book, you talk about Mickey trying to get, in his dreams after retirement, he's trying to get into Yankee Stadium, and they hear now batting number 7.
Position number 7.
From a distance, right. And he hears it from a distance. He's knocking feverishly at the clubhouse door, at the whatever, and they won't let him in. And he's hearing all this, and he had these nightmares, repeated nightmares.
Yeah. See, interestingly enough, I bet most ball players have that sort of reaction after they retire. I really do.
Right.
I mean, it's very difficult. You've grown up since you were 7 years old playing the game of baseball. And if you end up reaching the heights that some of these people reach, it's because you're a fabulous player, and that's what you've done your whole life. So now at age 35, 36, 37, 38, you're retiring. And before 1977, when players started to make at least enough money that they could live on, the players would retire and have to get jobs.
Right.
To go to work. Yeah. And it was very difficult.
And sometimes they'd work even during the season, like they'd sell insurance and what have you, to teammates and all those things, just to work, just to make a nut. And plus, people don't realize there was an old saying by Patrick Ewing, we make a lot, but we spend a lot. And everybody laughed at him for that. It came out wrong. It was one of these things where you got millionaires at that time striking, so the average person couldn't get it. But if you stop to think about it, there's an expectation when you're an athlete to take care of your family, take care of the hanger-oners, try not to get
we're going fairly far afield, but there is a study that came out fairly recently that 50% of the retired football and basketball players, even the guys who were making $10 million a year, 50% of those guys are broke.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, you would think that the new era of these contracts would at least assure that they could put, if you're going to get $20 million, could you put away $1 million for?
Right. But Patrick Ewing was telling the truth.
Right. That
They lived as though their income would continue forever. Buy the most incredibly expensive cars, the most incredibly expensive houses. A few of them bought airplanes.
Right.
Derek Jeter lives in Tampa. You would think he lives in the Taj Mahal, for crying out loud. It's really quite amazing, some of the houses that these people have built. It really is.
Yeah.
But So back to Ted Williams at any rate.
Okay.
It was only after he retired, after the 1960 season, that he softened when he saw how much the fans loved him. And, in fact, in Boston, there is this tunnel, the Ted Williams Tunnel, that they've named after him. How many ball players have tunnels or bridges named after him? Not too many. He was so huge, and part of the fun of Red Sox Nation was interviewing his teammates and having them talk about Ted and his his personality and who he was and what he did and so forth.
Anything about his wartime experience that you can
absolutely
pass along?
Sure.
That
he hit 400. He hit 521 home runs and missed basically 4 years of his career. So imagine, say he hit 40 home runs for those 4 years. He would have had almost 700 home runs. That's what cost him. One of the things that Ted told me was that he had been drafted into World War II, where he was a flyer. Most of the athletes, the baseball players who got drafted into World War II, ended up playing baseball at home on base teams. Not many of them actually went and fought. And Ted flew. He flew jets. He was a flyer.
Yeah.
He and John Glenn ended up being flyers. And Jerry Coleman was another one. Yankees Jerry Coleman was another one who flew with Ted. And Ted told me that the deal was that he was not. They had made some sort of deal was that he would never again be called into
active
service to fight.
Yeah, and they did, and they messed with him.
They did.
With Korea.
Korea broke out, and they broke their promise. And Ted
he was pissed at that. He went, but
I actually interviewed a few people who were in Korea with him, and they said that basically most of the time Ted was a loner who really didn't talk to anybody. That he just sort of sat in the corner and just fumed the whole time he was there. Though we have here in St. Petersburg, in the Trop, the Ted Williams Hitters Museum. They got wonderful, wonderful photos and memorabilia of Ted. And one of the panels shows the airplane that crashed. Ted had one flight, his jet, the landing gear.
Right.
Open.
I heard an interview with the late Jerry Coleman talking about that.
Right. That's
they
right.
were up in the air, and Mayday, Mayday. They didn't know who it was at the time.
It was Ted, and he didn't bail out. And Ted didn't bail out because he was afraid that the plane would crash and kill somebody. And so he landed that thing with him in it. And it went, streaming to the end of the runway, and he got out of there alive.
Didn't miraculously catch on fire.
Because most of the time they did.
Right.
But that's, part of his lore. Ted Williams is also in the Fishing Hall of Fame, believe it or not. There was
Sears. I remember Sears giving him
that's right.
a big contract.
Right, big contract. And he lived in Isla Madura, down in the Keys. And he spent a great deal of time down there fishing.
And a recluse, as you say, kind of a guy. And his teammates would go down
interesting. There. Yeah, interesting what happened.
Doer and those guys would go down there, and they'd really take a hell of a time. It wasn't easy being his friend. It wasn't easy being in his company because I think he might have even been diagnosed as bipolar, and it was before the time of reliable.
Well, let's put it this way. He certainly was ADD. He was ADD if he wasn't bipolar. Bipolar may be a little bit of a stretch, but he had a flash temper, and you had to be.
Yeah, I've read some stuff where on his fishing expeditions with teammates. I don't remember which one. It might have been Doer. It might have been Pesky. He could be an abusive guy.
Yes, he could.
Okay.
And they came to understand him and to accept that, too.
Right.
It wasn't that they were going to turn away from him. And eventually he would apologize. He always apologized, a day later. Sort of, sorry I came up the other day. That sort of thing. He called me up one day.
Why John Wayne didn't play him or him play John Wayne?
Well, the funny thing is John Wayne never went to war. Never. Ted Williams was John Wayne.
Right.
John Wayne could never play Ted Williams because Ted Williams actually went to war.
Right.
John Wayne was just a movie actor who was pretending. That's the funny thing about that. But Ted was such an interesting guy.
Exactly the same way as American's hero. We don't have much time. Let's dwell on the Boston race situation a little bit more. Like Pumpsie came up so late. Not just in baseball, in basketball, Bill Russell, athletes at Boston just got a hell of a tough time. What with housing and you wouldn't think it. It's the East. It's there's so many universities going on. What makes Boston the way it is?
Well, it was mostly coming from the Irish. I mean, the Irish had the toughest time when they came into Boston in the 1890s and early 1900s. No Irish need apply, NINA. No Irish need apply, and they were just treated like crap, just terribly. And eventually they ended up taking over the city. The Kennedys and various and sundry politicians ended up taking over Boston. The Irish did. So when the blacks started to, come to town, so they were treated by the Irish the way people had treated the Irish.
Right.
And it was terrible. I mean, it really was.
But there's not a
terrible.
minority that comes into town that hasn't gone through it. We, the Jews, went through the exact same thing. But with the blacks, it's all the time. You don't.
Well, this is 2016, and I think really the one thing that may have healed the city of Boston more than anything else was that bombing during the marathon when Big Poppy stood up and basically said, we are one, and Big Poppy, who is African American, is beloved. He is the first.
Absolutely.
He is the
and
first.
Is this a miracle? What the year he's having today?
It is amazing. It is absolutely amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
Bill Russell could has the most difficult time finding housing. He won something like 8 champions for the Celtics, and they didn't want to live in the neighborhood.
Read one of his books where he said what people did to him.
Oh, sure.
Into
sure.
his home.
Absolutely. That's right. And
just the most degrading things imaginable. And this guy is leading and the same people that come out and cheer him, and Casey Jones and Sam Jones and Willie Knowles and a whole bunch of other blacks, they cheer like hell. They celebrate championships. And, it was just like a lot of it was like San Francisco not accepting Willie in the early days, giving him a hell of a hard time with housing and what have you.
I'm trying to look at my bookshelf. There's this marvelous book by Howard Bryant. There it is. It's called Shut Out. If you want to read about the history of African American athletes in Boston, go find yourself a book called Shut Out by Howard Bryant, who's a brilliant, brilliant reporter. I think you see him on ESPN these days. At any rate,
a black gentleman.
Yes, that really explains it. A marvelous book.
I think I read that book, and it talks a lot about Tommy Harper.
Yeah,
in that book.
Tommy Harper. I called up Tommy Harper, and he says, "I'm not talking to you or anybody else about this." I mean, he was just, whoa. This is an angry guy because of the way he was treated in Boston. I mean, all these people wanted was a fair chance, and in a way, they got a fair chance in that they were able to make it onto the Red Sox team, but they never ever got the acclaim. They never felt the love from the Red Sox fans, and I think, quite frankly, a couple of people did. El Tiante, Louis Tiant, was one of the first who did. He did feel the love. They actually loved him. But not a lot of them. Not a lot of them. And of course, Big Poppy. Big Poppy, I don't know. He has reached. Jim Rice was a son of a bitch. Jim Rice could not have been nastier. Yeah, no, he was not a good guy. And Jim Rice was terribly resentful of the fact that who was the other great star who came up the same year he did, the center fielder.
Fred Lynn.
Fred Lynn, yeah. That the fans loved Fred Lynn and did not have the same respect for Rice. And Rice was just nasty to the press, nasty to the fans. And it makes me laugh because he's now, one of the microphone guys for the Red Sox. He's one of the yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He's got the mic at the games. Yeah,
we have come a long way, baby.
Yes, we have. True.
But it's interesting. Tommy Harper's reaction, not to talk to you, but to talk to the black author and tell him what happened, is almost racism in reverse, and I don't think it's any more constructive than what he suffered through.
Maybe not, but it's certainly more allowed.
Yeah.
It may not be constructive, but it's much more understandable. Believe me, it is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Hall pass forever for those people.
That's right. You got it. Yep.
No question.
Yep.
Thank you, Peter. This has been
my
fun.
pleasure, Ralphie.
Okay, we'll talk to you next week, same time, same place.
Look forward to it. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody. Hang in there.